So before this, we were actually talking about transitioning from what we felt, or before we started the podcast, we are talking about transitioning about what we felt on cultural appropriation to something like Igorots adopting uh, different cultures, like country music or country in general.
Cowboy.
Um,
So the flip
Cowboys,
side of the coin.
exactly.
Right?
So I don't think we really felt that it was a form of appropriation, but I just want to open this up to you guys.
Well, country music
Well,
is a real big thing, especially in the mountains, and partly because the music was brought in by the early colonizers. So you know, so like I think that what we were mentioning before was that the reason that a lot of folks like country music is because of its expressiveness and its ability to tell story. So basically, that's something that our folks had and we're doing already. They just transferred the type of music and the storytelling into country music. So whether they know it or not, that's what they did. But because country music was the kind of like that, I guess that was that thing that next form or next evolution of music for the older generation at that time, and of course it's passed down to the following generations, and even to this day, a lot of the young folks, they just love country music out there, and it's a great expressive music, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it exists over there. And it's really interesting because like when I was younger, going back to that kind of idea what we were talking about, what I mentioned earlier is like, why don't I like this? Well, when I was younger, I didn't really like country music, and as I got older, and I may have mentioned this in the last podcast or maybe after the podcast, but look, when I got older, I learned to appreciate the music because it was all around me.
mhm.
But when I thought about why I didn't like it, it was because everybody around me was saying they didn't like it. I mean, I'm talking about non-Igorots because everything was about hip hop. Everything was about, especially at that age, hip hop, either rock music, heavy metal, everything but like country. What we always related country to is people just drinking and singing sad songs about like how someone got
The
shot to death
breakup.
or something like that. Yeah, or they broke up or something. Some
Yeah,
really
yeah,
dreary
yeah,
bluesy kind of
yeah.
music. And so it's like uh, it wasn't my thing back then. But then even country music has evolved. But but being exposed to so much of it and listening to a lot of the lyrics and storytelling and the way it's delivered it's a very honest and
Mhm.
very honest music and very expressive where you don't have to like kill too much when you sing on the runs and stuff. You just kind of like express it out. It's almost like you're talking, especially the old country. It's almost like they're talking.
Yeah.
Right,
And
right.
then there's that
I
whole
mean,
thing with the guitar.
you think about identity and what is the identity when you think of like the association of being in the country, being the backwater, being the bundok.
The
Well, I mean,
boonies. Yeah.
yeah. I mean that the elements of that music speak to a lot of our folks. That element of ruggedness,
Mhm.
of self reliance, of being tough, being strong, and of loyalty, of love, and these are all things that are embellished within the story. Because I mean, his traditionally in our cultures, we have chants that speak of stories, and it goes back a long ago. Well, and very much in country music, it speaks of stories and storylines. I mean, what's our national anthem? Which it's probably Country Roads, right? And you think about like what that means when we play it. We play it at almost every BVAC function when you have like some sort of string instrument, you know, and it speaks of like almost heaven. And whether you switch out West Virginia for Baguio City,
Mhm.
uh, these elements of being out there. Life is older, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, blowing like a breeze, right? I mean,
Right.
those things really remind us of who we are, that those elements. And so that I think that's a gift of music, even though this is like Western brand music, and it comes from like what, John Denver. uh, it has come to mean so much for those who are now, especially those of us who live abroad. So when it's sung, it's almost like a sing along, for us, because it feels like that anthem, that the Igorot Nation anthem. And I know that other cultures definitely have taken that song to other ethnic groups have taken this song too as their thing. But definitely how country music has spoken to our people really, is a matter of how we've seen our identity in the world. And because my parents used to play like country music when we were on the cassette decks, the 8 tracks, and all of that, when we were taking these road trips. So we'd listen to like Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash and Anne Murray and Dolly
Along with some
Parton.
disco,
Yeah, disco too, but it would be country or
Wind and
disco.
Fire.
Yeah, yeah.
Kenny Rogers,
But
rest in peace.
oh,
Yeah,
Kenny
Kenny Rogers.
Rogers. There
Yeah,
you go.
Dolly
There
Parton.
you go.
Dolly Parton.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely Kenny Rogers. God, thinking about
yeah.
Kenny Rogers chicken right now. But to just add on to that, you know what I find really interesting though, because going along with like, geez, like when I was younger, how I didn't appreciate the music, but now that I'm older, I do. Well, like I play guitar and I like to learn different styles. Just this kind of goes into that whole thing of looking at different culture, different styles of music and stuff. And you know, going to Hawaii, I've been to Hawaii like 4 times. What I always love is the slack key music, the slack key guitar, and how like peaceful it sounds.
Yeah.
And well, I found out, when before I studied, I thought that was just, they just had that music. And I would think about it, it's like, why did I not like country, but I like this music? Essentially, it's country music. Saki guitar is like that country folk kind of feel. But I like the Hawaiian music, yet I had this weird feeling towards the country music that my people were singing. And what I even learned even more was that they had borrowed. I think they were influenced by either Portuguese or Spanish cowboys that moved to Hawaii to train people how to farm. They left their guitars there. Yeah, they left their guitars there, and the natives kind of like picked up the guitars and started playing it and tuning it their own ways, and they just were really creative, trying to replicate the sounds that they had heard before from the other cowboys who were teaching them, the Spanish or Portuguese cowboys who were teaching them how to farm. And that vocalization that they do, where they do a lot of, they do a lot of like using, they call it head voice, or like that kind of nasally kind of singing that they do. Well, that was influenced by yodelers. They had people who were from that area come over also to teach them different things, not music, but they were yodelers. And so the natives over there, they adopted that sound into their music. And then when you listen to Hawaiian music now, that's what it is. It's that combination. And so I could appreciate that history. And I started to realize, like, man, like as I grew older, I started to learn to appreciate why Igorots, our people, are integrating different things also into what's happening. And I don't know, is it cultural appropriation?
Speaking on cultural appropriation, like it has, you have to say something about how like I used to think it was cultural appropriation. Like I used to argue with somebody, but like the fact that we're wearing Western clothing even though we're of Igorot descent, like that's technically cultural appropriation. But in a way, it kind of is, right? But because the argument was that because they were a dominant culture, and if they're stealing from a culture that is being oppressed, then that's what the cultural appropriation is. And to me, I don't quite think it's to that extent that we're stealing from we're not initially stealing from like the white culture with the country music. I think that it's like because with the Americans coming to the Philippines, they were trying to assimilate uh, Igorots, right? That was their
Right.
main point. So in order for us to fit in, we had to assimilate. So we didn't appropriate in that sense of like
What
dominance or
what you're
whatever.
saying is that there
Mainstream
was a
culture.
power element within that kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that
because with
that
a
that had
cultural
influence.
appropriation, yeah. Because with cultural appropriation, what it is like the power dynamics between the people who are in power versus the people that are being oppressed, right? The
Hmm.
woke stuff. But when I express to people what like where I'm from is like what what where Igorots come from, the best way I can express it is like think of the Appalachian Mountains, and
Mm.
where country music came from was from the eastern Appalachians. Like I'm looking at freaking Google. Like the origins of country music can be found in recordings of Southern Appalachian fiddle, blah blah blah. So like in terms of not only assimilation, but what Igorots have done is they've adopted and they've incorporated in order to like connect to the to the to the wider culture, but connect it in a way that's been familiar. So like with country
Yes.
music, I remember even in the IIC in Hawaii, one of the aunties were talking about how the country music and like specifically country roads is very similar to like I think like a certain specific Igorot style of music, but she just basically said it was like it's very like how I think it was the Kalinga song, the what's it called? Salidumai. It sounds like Salidumai in the way it's like being sung and whatever. But
Mm.
yeah, again, basically like the reason for me the reason why country music is such a big thing is like if you think back at like the history of country music, it came from the Appalachian Mountains, which is very similar to where we're coming from, where we're like Igor's come from, the mountains. Like that's that
Right,
their
right.
basic similarities and whatnot, and also
Yeah,
the
that
music
I
style too. It's very similar.